One war, millions dead, a continent in ruins. Adolf Hitler was the face of terror, but his legacy extended beyond the battlefield. What if I told you that the most terrifying secrets of the Third Reich have yet to be fully revealed? What are the tunnels beneath the mountains of Poland hiding? What was the armored train that vanished without a trace carrying? And what about the treasures, the lost gold, the stolen artifacts still hidden underground? These are the 13 most chilling discoveries after World War II. The Nazi Gold Train: Myth, Mystery and Obsession. In southern Poland, amid the dense forests and mountains of the Sudetenland, lies a legend as fascinating as it is chilling: the Nazi Gold Train. According to accounts that emerged in the final days of World War II, an armored convoy loaded with gold, jewels, stolen art and other priceless treasures vanished without a trace as the forces of the Third Reich retreated before the relentless advance of the Red Army. The year was 1945. The German lines were crumbling and chaos reigned in the last bastions of the regime. The Nazi High Command, aware of their imminent defeat, began hiding the treasures looted over the years in occupied Europe. One of these supposed shipments was loaded onto a fortified train meant to reach the city of Wałbrzych, but it never reached its destination. It vanished. And from then on, the legend began. The train, according to the most popular versions, was diverted into a secret network of underground tunnels built as part of the enigmatic Reich project, a colossal Nazi engineering feat hidden deep within the Ural Mountains. These tunnels, dug with forced labor from concentration camp prisoners, were intended to house factories, bunkers, or even hideouts for regime leaders. There, amidst hidden passages and collapsed entrances, many believe the train was deliberately buried, never to be found. Decades passed, and the story was fueled by rumors, dubious testimonies, and vague documents. But in 2015, the legend came alive with unexpected force when two treasure hunters, armed with ground-scanning technology, claimed to have located the train. Polish authorities reacted cautiously, authorizing supervised excavations near the city. The world's media flocked to the site, awaiting the revelation of the century. However, after months of searching, no train was found. The signals detected underground turned out to be geological formations. Still, the fervor didn't fade. Because what gives this story its power isn't just the possibility of a lost cargo, but what it symbolizes: the unbridled greed of Nazism, its obsession with control, art, and gold, and the perpetual desire to erase its traces. Skeptics maintain that the Nazi gold train is nothing more than a myth born out of the chaos at the end of the war. But for many, the lack of evidence is not evidence of its non-existence, but rather an indication of a closely guarded secret. Meanwhile, the Wałbrzych site continues to be scrutinized by dreamers, treasure hunters, and scholars, all pursuing the same question: what if it's really there? The Enigma machine, the hidden language of power. At the heart of the war, when every message could mean the difference between life and death, the Nazis had a seemingly insurmountable technological advantage: the Enigma machine. This encryption device became the symbol of German military secrecy, a nearly impenetrable barrier for the Allies, until it wasn't. The Enigma story begins before the war. Originally designed by German engineer Arthur Scherbius in the 1920s as a secure communications tool for businesses, it soon caught the attention of the Third Reich's armed forces. Its mechanism was ingenious, a series of interchangeable rotors that, when turned, transformed any letter pressed into a different one. With each keystroke, the rotors spun, creating a new configuration. This meant trillions of possible combinations, making the encoded message virtually unbreakable, unless the exact configuration of the day was known. The Nazis trusted Enigma so much that they used it to coordinate operations on all fronts: submarines, aviation, troop movements, counterintelligence. The machine was small, portable, and its interface resembled that of a common typewriter, but its true power lay in its complexity. In the eyes of the enemy, any Enigma-coded transmission was little more than gibberish. But in the darkness of war, another mind was working silently to break that wall. At Bletchley Park, England, a group of brilliant mathematicians, cryptographers, and linguists were dedicated exclusively to the task of deciphering the Enigma code. The most famous of them, Alan Turing. His name, known today to every computer enthusiast, was then that of an eccentric young mathematician whose ideas would revolutionize not only the war but the entire world. Thanks to a combination of mathematical logic, mechanical engineering, and a bit of espionage, including the recovery of an Enigma machine captured aboard a German U-boat, the British managed to build an electromechanical machine called Bombe, capable of trying thousands of combinations in search of the key each day. The work was titanic, against the clock, and in secret. Every day the Nazis changed the Enigma settings, and the Allies had to decipher them from scratch. Finally, in 1941, the Bletchley Park team managed to consistently break the Enigma code. This feat allowed them to intercept and read thousands of German messages, anticipating attacks, diverting fleets, and significantly shortening the war. It is estimated that thanks to breaking Enigma, the conflict ended 2 years earlier than it would have otherwise. Paradoxically, this silent victory had to be kept secret even after the war, so as not to alert other governments to Britain's code-breaking capabilities. The contributions of Turing and his team were recognized only much later, after many of them had already died. The Amber Room, the missing treasure of the Tsar and the Nazis. Imagine a room whose walls glow like the glow of an eternal sunset, made of polished amber panels, bathed in gold leaf, and mirrors that reflect the light as if time had stopped at its zenith. Welcome to the legendary Amber Room, once known as the eighth wonder of the world. But behind that splendor lies a mystery. It disappeared during the worst years of World War II, and ever since its whereabouts have been the subject of persecution, theories, and obsessions. Created between 1701 and 1714 by the German sculptor Andreas Schlüter and the Danish amber master Gottfried Wolfram, the room was originally intended for Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin. When King Frederick William IX presented it to Peter the Great in 1716, it was installed in the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo near St. Petersburg. The room eventually covered over 55 square meters and contained over 6 tons of amber in intricate reliefs, marble, gilding, gems, and mirrors. In 1941, at the beginning of the invasion of the USSR, the curators attempted to camouflage it with wallpaper, but it was discovered. Within just 36 hours, it was dismantled and moved to Königsberg, present-day Kaliningrad, under German supervision. Shortly after, an exhibition opened in the local castle. With the advance of the Red Army in 1945, the records were lost. The castle was bombed by the RAF in August 1944 and partially destroyed by Soviet troops after their occupation on April 9, 1945. The whereabouts of the Amber Room remains a matter of almost magical speculation. Destruction during the bombing raids on Königsberg in 1944 to 1945. Several Soviet reports, including one by researcher Alexander Brusov, conclude that the room was destroyed then, sunk on a ship such as the Wilhelm Gustloff or other Nazi treasure ships after sailing from Gdynia, hidden in secret mines, either in tunnels under Königsberg, in nearby bunkers, or in salt mines in Göttingen, Germany, under the cipher Amber Room BWWII, submerged in an alpine lake, hypothesis that German officers sank crates in Lake Toplitz. Replica and hoax, theory that the Soviets or even Stalin hid the authentic room by replacing it with replicas before the Nazis looted it. Since the 1950s, archaeologists, treasure hunters, and governments have searched the castle ruins for salt mines, bunkers, and lakes. Radar strategies, surveys, and underground drilling revealed brick rooms beneath former bunkers, but without finding the original room. The Lake Toplitz treasure captured their attention, although no amber panels were ever found. Several researchers involved in the search suffered accidents or mysterious deaths, giving rise to rumors of a curse. According to stories, one researcher died in a car accident. Another was found in a Bavarian forest with suspicious injuries, fueling the belief that anyone who got too close to the room would end up in misfortune. In 1979, the USSR decided to reconstruct the room. Ukrainian, using black and white photographed fragments, reconstructed using retro-Baroque techniques and raw material from Kaliningrad amber, 90% of the world's amber. Completed in 2003, it was inaugurated by Putin and Schroeder on the tercentenary of St. Petersburg, Petersburg. The nighttime replica dazzles the visitor, but leaves a bitter taste. The original room is still missing. Recovered fragments, such as an Italian mosaic in 1997, raised hopes. Other collectors claimed to have panels, only to be discredited. Recent investigations in Bavarian mines point to Nazi cover-ups, and modern equipment uses ground-penetrating radar and prospecting. In 2020, a shipwreck, the SS Karlsruhe, was found with crates that could contain remains, but its contents were military, not the room. Today, there is a wide range of theories. The room was destroyed, sunk, buried, stolen, or hidden as a state secret. Russian authorities insist it was destroyed in Königsberg, while hunters continue to search lakes, mines, bunkers, and sunken ships. The room has become a global legend, a symbol of lost art, historical memory, and unsolved mysteries. The Amber Room was not just an imperial treasure, it was the embodiment of dreams, pride, and culture. Its disappearance reveals how banal destruction in the service of ideology can be. The reconstructed room is a tribute, but its original utopia remains hidden in shadows. And as long as someone continues searching with determination, uncovering secrets, perhaps one day that sunset will re-emerge in golden resin from the rubble of history. The Dead Sea Scrolls, echoes of an ancient faith in times of war. On the shores of the Dead Sea, in a harsh desert region of silent beauty, a young Bedouin shepherd from the Tamire tribe threw a stone into a cave, searching for a goat he had lost. The year was 1947, and Palestine, still under British mandate, was simmering with political and religious tensions. But what this young man, named Mohammed Ed-Dib, heard was not a simple bouncing sound on a rock. It was the unmistakable crack of a vessel breaking. Without realizing it, he had initiated one of the most momentous archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Barely 2 years after the end of World War II, the world was still breathing amidst ruins and reconstruction. The war had left deep scars, both physical and spiritual, nations destroyed, entire peoples decimated, and a latent cultural trauma crying out for answers, meaning, and redemption. In this context of global turmoil, the discovery of ancient biblical manuscripts was not simply an archaeological anecdote, but an event charged with philosophical, theological, and even political implications. The manuscripts were discovered in an area known as Qumran, north of the Dead Sea in what is now the West Bank. There, hidden in a series of 11 caves, lay more than 900 manuscripts and fragments, many of them carefully rolled and stored in clay jars. The texts were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and dated to a period between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD. Their state of preservation, especially in such a harsh climate, was remarkable. They included copies of biblical texts, exegetical commentaries, monastic rules, liturgical hymns, legal documents, and apocalyptic writings. Among the most striking texts was the complete Book of Isaiah, more than 1,000 years older than any other version known until then. Also notable were the Manual of Discipline, which offered a detailed insight into the author's communal life, and the enigmatic temple scroll, which minutely described the dimensions and regulations of the ideal temple. Another manuscript, known as the Copper Scroll, was a list of supposed hidden treasures, written not on papyrus or parchment, but on thin sheets of beaten copper, suggesting a purpose entirely different from the rest. Who were the authors of these manuscripts? The most widely accepted hypothesis among scholars points to a Jewish sect known as the Essenes, an apocalyptic and separatist group who, in disagreement with the official priesthood of the Temple of Jerusalem, retreated to the desert to live a life of purity and spiritual preparation for the imminent arrival of the kingdom of God. This community, possibly composed of no more than a few hundred men, lived an austere life, following strict rules of ritual purity, celibacy, sharing of possessions, and constant prayer. For them, preserving the written word was a form of resistance and holiness. The appearance of these texts coincided with a pivotal moment in the history of the Middle East. The British Mandate was about to end, and in 1948 the birth of the State of Israel would be declared. Archaeology, which already played a political role in legitimizing territorial narratives, was shaken by this discovery. The manuscripts were contested by various actors, Bedouins seeking to sell them, antiquarians like Kondo in Bethlehem, and religious figures like Metropolitan Mar Athanasius, Yeshua Samuel of the Syriac Orthodox Church, and Israeli scholars who subsequently acquired them. Some scrolls were even sold in classified ads in the Wall Street Journal before being purchased by intermediaries in the Hebrew state. It was in the 1950s that systematic efforts to classify, translate, and preserve the scrolls were consolidated. In 1965, the State of Israel inaugurated the Shrine of the Book, a white, jar-lid-shaped building at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, to house the most important manuscripts. The contrast between the dome, the white stone of the sanctuary, and the black stone of the accompanying building represent the duality between light and darkness, between revealed and hidden knowledge. But beyond their religious content or archaeological value, the Dead Sea Scrolls became a powerful symbol. In a world that had just experienced the Holocaust, the destruction of synagogues, the burning of books, and the systematic persecution of an entire culture, these scrolls emerged as ancient witnesses that spoke of another exile, another struggle, another faith that had gone into hiding so as not to perish. The echo of their message transcended the centuries and served as a reminder that spiritual resilience, the need to preserve the word and memory, are impulses as old as humanity itself. Even today, scrolls remain an object of study, controversy, and wonder. New technologies such as multispectral scanning have made it possible to recover invisible letters and reconstruct scattered fragments. At the same time, their legacy raises contemporary questions. Who has the right to safeguard the treasures of the past? Can ancient religious texts offer guidance in a fragmented modern world? Is faith written on parchment a response to the chaos of the present? The Bunker of Fury, the end in the shadows of Berlin. Beneath the smouldering ruins of Berlin, buried under tons of concrete, steel, and despair, lay the Führer bunker, the last bastion of a doomed regime, like a sarcophagus. There, deep underground, far from the light and judgment of the outside world, Adolf Hitler lived out his final days, surrounded by loyalists, traitors, and the symbolic corpses of a crumbling empire. What began as a pragmatic military construction ended as a claustrophobic theater of the Nazi apocalypse. Initially conceived as part of the Reich Chancellery's bunker complex, its construction was reinforced in 1944 when the threat of Allied bombing became unbearable. Located some 8 meters underground and protected by layers of concrete up to 4 meters thick, the complex was divided into 2 main areas: the Vorbunker, or anti-bunker, and the Führer bunker itself, deeper and reserved for the upper echelons. The place had 15 interconnected rooms, all simply furnished, with concrete walls and a constant humidity that permeated every corner. But no physical armor could contain the internal decomposition of the Nazi leadership. By April 1945, with the Red Army besieging Berlin and the Western fronts closing in like pincers, Hitler abandoned any pretense of strategic leadership. He took refuge underground with his inner circle, Eva Braun, his longtime partner, Joseph and Magda Goebbels, the fervent guardians of Nazi dogma, Martin Bormann, his inscrutable personal secretary, and other senior officials who preferred to accompany him to the end rather than face the outside world. On the surface, Berlin had become an urban nightmare: rubble, fires, corpses, and civilians caught between 2 fires. But in the bunker, denial reigned. Protocol lunches were held, leaked radio bulletins were listened to, and planning was feigned while reality fragmented. Hitler, hunched over, prematurely aged, and ravaged by Parkinson's disease, received officers with useless maps and issued orders that no one obeyed anymore. Imaginary betrayals multiplied. There was a latent paranoia, as if the walls themselves could become enemies. The final madness was sealed on April 29, 1945, when Hitler, in an act disconnected from reality, married Eva Braun in a brief and formal ceremony officiated by a minor party official. A few hours later, he dictated his political testament, blaming the Jews for the war and branding Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler as traitors. The following day, April 30th, Hitler and Eva committed suicide in the bunker's living room. He shot himself in the temple with a Walter PPK pistol. She, as she had promised, ingested cyanide. Their bodies were quickly wrapped in blankets, doused with gasoline, and cremated in the Chancellery garden, following instructions from the dictator himself, who feared the fate that Mussolini had suffered days earlier. But the horror didn't end there. Magda and Joseph Goebbels, after unsuccessfully attempting to negotiate a surrender with the Soviets, decided to take their own lives as well. Beforehand, they poisoned their 6 children with cyanide pills while they slept. The final scene was terrifyingly cold. A mother combing her daughter's hair, giving them candy, knowing it would be her last act as a mother. Then, both adults went out into the bunker courtyard and committed suicide. Joseph shot himself, Magda ingested poison. Their bodies were also burned, albeit incompletely. When Soviet troops finally took Berlin on May 2nd, they found the bunker partially destroyed, looted by soldiers and stripped of all glory. There was no gold, no trophies, no secret technology. Only fetid dampness, crumbling furniture, and crumpled documents. For the soldiers who descended into that dark underbelly of Nazism, it was like entering the cave of a dead monster. During the Cold War, the site was sealed off by the GDR, German Democratic Republic, and in the 1980s the visible remains were demolished. With German reunification, the area was rebuilt as a common residential area. Today, the exact spot where the Führer bunker once stood is a parking lot, surrounded by modern buildings. A discreet plaque, installed in 2006 after a long public debate, marks the site, but without commemoration or drama. Germany has chosen not to monumentalize the site, to prevent it from becoming an object of worship for neo-Nazis or revisionists. However, history cannot be hidden beneath the asphalt. The images, the testimonies, the documents, everything is still there. The Führer bunker remains a symbol of the end of an era of barbarism. It wasn't just a physical refuge. It was an anticipated mausoleum, the final act of a tragedy written with fire, steel, and propaganda. In that sealed basement, not only a war ended, but a delirium was extinguished. The echo of the last words, of the screams and whispers, still seems to resonate between those invisible walls. Because the end of the Third Reich did not occur on a battlefield, but in a damp underground corridor where fear, wounded pride, and denial dug the grave of an ideology that believed itself invincible. In the dead heart of Berlin, the world witnessed the price of blind obedience, absolute fanaticism, and self-consuming fury. The Bad Arolsen archives, the written memory of horror. In a small German town called Bad Arolsen, nestled among peaceful hills and quiet streets, lies one of the most haunting documentary repositories of the 20th century. The Arolsen Archive, also known as the International Tracing Service, is a vast collection of more than 30 million documents relating to the victims of Nazism, deportees, enslaved people, murdered people, and missing persons. At first glance, the building complex doesn't suggest the weight of history it holds, but once inside, the atmosphere changes. Endless shelves, worn folders, handwritten letters, typed lists, photographs of faded faces. Everything there whispers of one thing: testimony. These archives were started by the International Red Cross at the end of the war, with the urgent goal of helping millions of people reunite with missing relatives. Concentration camp prisoners, forced laborers, children separated from their parents, many of them vanished without a trace. Arolsen became a beacon for those searching for answers amidst the silence. Over the years, its function changed. What began as a humanitarian effort also became a historical record, a piece of judicial evidence, a tool for remembrance and justice. Documents from Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, transport lists, medical records, death certificates. Each page is a fragment of life and death that refuses to be forgotten. For decades, the archives were not fully accessible. For reasons of privacy and diplomatic sensitivities, the contents were restricted. It wasn't until 2007 that they were officially opened to the public. Since then, thousands of descendants have been able to reconstruct the fates of their relatives, many for the first time. One of the most powerful aspects of this archive is its human dimension. It's not just about numbers. There are letters from children searching for their parents, reports from survivors recounting what they saw, records of confiscated personal belongings, rings, watches, suitcases. Everything is recorded with brutal precision. Since 2016, a digitization effort has brought part of the archive online, allowing people around the world to access these documents. The work has not only been technical, but also ethical. How to present these horrors without turning them into spectacle, how to educate without hurting, how to honor the victims through reality. Arolsen Archive is neither a museum nor a tomb. It is a bridge between history and memory, a warning written on millions of pages, many stained by the passage of time and others by invisible tears. At a time when denialism and misinformation threaten once again, this archive stands as a documentary barrier against oblivion. As long as these records exist, as long as the echo of the names inscribed there is heard, the horror cannot be repeated without first being remembered. In a world where the truth is often diluted, Bad Arolsen remains a library of memory, one that does not forget. Yamashita's treasure, gold, shadows and legends in the Philippines. Amidst the dense jungle of Luzon, where the earth bears the marks of conflict and roots are entangled with history, lies a golden legend born of horror, the Yamashita treasure. Halfway between myth, conspiracy and secret archives, this story begins with an imperial promise of eternal wealth and ends shrouded in dynamite-sealed tunnels, ambitious dictators and shadows that linger to this day. The name comes from General Tomoyuki Yamashita, nicknamed the Tiger of Malaysia for his swift conquest of Singapore in 1942. But it was in the Philippines toward the end of the war where his legend would merge with that of gold. Appointed commander-in-chief in 1944, just as the Japanese Empire was faltering, Yamashita arrived on an archipelago that had become a battlefield. Although there are doubts about his direct involvement, he is credited with overseeing, or at least permitting, one of the most ambitious plundering operations of the 20th century. According to multiple testimonies and subsequent documents, the Japanese, with the help of collaborators, Asian slaves and Allied prisoners, transported enormous quantities of gold, jewels, sacred statues, stolen art, and looted relics from countries such as Malaysia, Burma, Indonesia, and Thailand. The objective was simple and brutal: to hide it all in the Philippines, whose strategic location would allow its recovery after a possible Japanese reconquest or as a fund for a future imperial resurgence. The treasures were supposedly buried in hand-dug underground complexes, many of them within natural caves, raised temples, or tunnel systems that had existed since the Spanish colonial era. To ensure absolute secrecy, the access points were blown up, and thousands of men perished with them, slaves, prisoners, and even Japanese soldiers. Testimonies agree on one disturbing detail: the maps were secret, even from the builders themselves. Whoever completed the work never came out alive. After the Japanese surrender in 1945, rumors began to circulate. Many locals spoke of tunnels that vibrated with metallic echoes, of captured Japanese soldiers whispering about hidden gold, and of mysterious explosions that sealed invisible entrances. But it was in the 1970s that the myth reached its peak, thanks to a codename, Rogelio Roger Roxas. Roxas, a locksmith and amateur investigator, claimed to have found a cave in Baguio containing a solid gold Buddha over a meter tall and several crates of ingots. According to his testimony, the statue was hollow and contained diamonds. Shortly after his discovery, he claimed that armed men sent by President Ferdinand Marcos confiscated the treasure and arrested him. Years later, Roxas died under suspicious circumstances, but before doing so, he filed a legal complaint. His family launched a legal battle in the United States that culminated in 2005, when a Hawaiian court acknowledged the theft, although it failed to prove that Marcos kept all the treasure. The scandal sparked a new gold rush. International treasure hunters, former military personnel, amateur archaeologists, and even intelligence services began searching for clues. Some claimed to have found boxes bearing imperial seals. Others said they had recovered jewels of Thai origin. The CIA and other intelligence services, according to leaked documents, reportedly considered the gold as a potential fund for covert operations in Asia during the Cold War. Connections to Swiss banks and money laundering schemes through encrypted accounts that have not yet been fully traced were also revealed. But despite decades of excavations, explosions, thefts, deaths, and sensational documentaries, no one has presented conclusive evidence of the entire treasure's existence. Some believe that much of it was secretly recovered by the US under General Douglas MacArthur and used as part of the Black Eagle Trust to finance the fight against communism. Others maintain that most of the caches remain hidden, protected by geography, superstition, and the silence of the few surviving witnesses. Beyond its possible physical existence, the Yamashita treasure has become a symbol. of the brutality of war, of human greed, and of the unsung legacy of Japanese imperialism in Southeast Asia. Each ingot that might be found represents not only wealth but the price of a vicious occupation where millions of people were enslaved, tortured, and murdered by an empire in free fall. In the humid jungles of the Philippines, even today, farmers dig in silence, motivated by promises passed down from generation to generation. But what they're looking for isn't just gold. It's a way to reconcile with the past, to find meaning among the rubble, to shed light on a chapter that official books still dare not write in full ink. Because if the gold is there underground, then the story isn't over. And if it isn't, Yamashita's legend will remain a warning about the secrets left behind by war, about the silence of the powerful, and about what happens when the glitter of gold overshadows the truth. The USS Indianapolis, shipwreck, silence, and sharks. Deep in the dark, vast Pacific lies the corroded skeleton of the USS Indianapolis, a US Navy heavy cruiser whose story became one of the most painful, controversial, and poignant of the entire Second World War. Beyond the sunken metal, this ship carries a collective wound, a bitter lesson about duty, misinformation, negligence, and the terrifying struggle to survive in oblivion. It was 1945. The conflict in the Pacific was reaching its peak, and the world was still unaware that it was weeks away from a nuclear explosion. Against this backdrop, the USS Indianapolis, CA-35, was given a top-secret mission to transport key parts of the atomic bomb, Little Boy, including the enriched uranium core from the San Francisco Naval Base to the island of Tinian in the Marianas. That bomb would be dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th, marking a turning point in human history. But the ship that helped change the fate of the war was forgotten by those who were supposed to protect it. After successfully completing her delivery, the USS Indianapolis sailed for Leyte, Philippines, unescorted and unaware that the waters she would be cruising through were actively patrolled by enemy submarines. Critical information about her route was never shared by naval intelligence systems that, had they been, might have warned of the danger. In the early morning of July 30th, 1945, the Japanese submarine 158, commanded by Captain Mochitsura Hashimoto, detected her in the waters of the Philippine Sea. 2 torpedoes were enough to cause disaster. The first hit her bow directly, the second hit her engine room. In just 12 minutes, the cruiser broke up and sank in the darkness. Of the 1,195 men on board, nearly 900 survived the initial sinking, thrown into the ocean without adequate provisions, many without life jackets, and with only scattered inflatable rafts. The ship never sent a distress signal. Not a single alert was registered. What followed was one of the most brutal survival odysseys in naval history. For 5 endless days, the castaways drifted under the harsh tropical sun in waters infested with oceanic sharks. Their greatest enemy was not just the sea, but the silence. No one knew they were there. The salt water burned their wounded bodies. Thirst caused delirium. Some drank seawater, which drove them mad. The weakest died of hypothermia during the night or collapsed under the scorching sun during the day. Sharks attacked from below, attracted by blood and movement. Chilling accounts speak of men suddenly pulled underwater, of screams in the night, of bodies devoured in front of their comrades. It was the largest documented shark attack on humans in modern history. The US Navy didn't notice the ship's disappearance. It wasn't until August 2nd, when Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, pilot of a Lockheed Ventura aircraft on routine patrol, spotted the survivors, that a rescue operation began. When ships and aircraft finally arrived to rescue them, only 316 men remained alive. More than 870 had died, not from the direct sinking, but from exposure, untreated wounds, dehydration, insanity, and sharks. The impact was devastating, but rather than take responsibility, the Navy blamed the ship's captain, Charles Butler McVeigh III, accusing him of failing to zigzag, an evasive maneuver against submarines, despite traveling in known hazardous conditions and without escort. In a highly controversial trial, he was convicted of negligence, even though the Japanese submarine's own commander, Hashimoto, testified in his defense and stated that nothing would have changed the outcome of the attack. For decades, McVeigh lived with the stigma of guilt, harassed by letters from the families of deceased sailors. Finally, in 1968, unable to bear the pressure any longer, he committed suicide in his garden, clutching his service revolver and a small sailor figurine. It wasn't until 2000 that the US Congress officially exonerated Captain McVeigh, acknowledging that he had been wrongfully held responsible for a string of institutional errors. However, it took the Navy until 2001 to correct its official record. In 2017, more than 70 years after the sinking, an expedition led by Paul Allen, a Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist with a passion for naval history, located the remains of the USS Indianapolis at a depth of more than 5,500 meters north of the Celebes Sea. The discovery not only confirmed details of the sinking, but also offered a form of closure, a symbolic grave visible to family members and the nation. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis is more than a military tragedy. It's a dark mirror reflecting the fragility of systems, the brutality of war, the superhuman resilience of human beings, and the cost of silence. It was a story buried, minimized, and for years ignored. But it survived, as did those 316 men to tell its tale. Today, the name of the USS Indianapolis resonates not only as a symbol of sacrifice and service, but as a perennial warning. In war, mistakes are not exacted in ink, but in lives, and sometimes the greatest enemy is not visible, but the silence that devours in the darkness. The Bismarck, the steel colossus that challenged an empire. In the cold and violent waters of the North Atlantic lies a sleeping giant, the Bismarck, the pride of the German Kriegsmarine and one of the most formidable warships ever built. Its short but epic story became the stuff of naval legend, a relentless hunt, a colossal battle, and a landmark fall in World War II. The Bismarck was launched in 1939 and from day one was considered a threat to British naval supremacy. Its imposing and avant-garde design included heavy armor, 380mm guns, and unprecedented speed for its size. It was more than a ship. It was a symbol of German power on the high seas, destined to break the British blockade and deal mortal blows to Allied trade routes. Her first combat mission was also her last. In May 1941, the Bismarck sailed accompanied by the cruiser Prince Eugen for an Atlantic raiding operation, the objective to cut vital supply lines for Great Britain. But no sooner had they begun than they were detected. What followed was one of the most famous chases in naval history. In the Denmark Strait, the Bismarck engaged the British battleship HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy. The engagement was brutal and brief. A single broadside from the Bismarck blew the Hood to pieces, killing over 1,400 sailors in a matter of minutes. The United Kingdom was in shock. From that moment on, the order was clear: sink the Bismarck at all costs. For days, the German ship was pursued by the entire British fleet, aircraft from aircraft carriers, destroyers, battleships, all in the shadow of the steel monster. Finally, after a torpedo knocked out its rudder, the Bismarck was doomed. In the early hours of May 27, 1941, it was hit by a barrage of fire from the British battleships King George V and Rodney. Damaged, surrounded, and defenseless, the Colossus finally sank, taking more than 2,000 German sailors with it. But the story didn't end there. For decades, the exact location of the wreck remained a mystery. It wasn't until 1989 that underwater explorer Robert Ballard, the same man who discovered the Titanic, located the remains of the Bismarck at a depth of nearly 4,800 meters. What he saw was breathtaking, the hull almost intact, the cannons still pointed toward the horizon, the eternal silence of a war that ended at the bottom of the sea. The Bismarck represents more than a feat of naval engineering. It is a reminder of the brutality of war, the obsession with supremacy, and the price paid for military arrogance. Her downfall was not only a strategic Allied victory, but also a founding myth for 20th century naval history. Maus tank, the steel monster that never roared. In the final throes of the Third Reich, when defeat was already inevitable, Adolf Hitler and his engineers began to imagine weapons so powerful they could change the course of the conflict. Thus was born one of the most ambitious, absurd, and fearsome projects of the war, the Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus, the largest and heaviest tank ever built. Designed by legendary engineer Ferdinand Porsche, the Maus was conceived not just as a tank, but as a mobile fortress. It weighed 188 tons, more than an empty Boeing 747. It was almost 10 meters long, and its armor could withstand virtually any anti-tank shell of the time. Its main gun was 128 millimeters with a coaxial 75mm secondary gun. In theory, it could destroy any Allied tank before they could get close enough to counterattack. But that power came at a price: mobility. The mouse was slow, clumsy, and too heavy to cross ordinary bridges. To move it, solutions were devised such as fording river bottoms using snorkels or constructing special crossings. Fuel consumption was enormous. Its size made it impractical on any terrain other than asphalt or open areas. It was, in essence, a monster too big for real warfare. Only 2 prototypes were built before Germany's collapse. Neither saw combat. One was destroyed by its German operators to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The other was captured intact by Soviet forces who partially assembled it and studied it closely. Today, that prototype resides in the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia as a testament to the weapons-fueled madness of Nazism. The mouse represents the pinnacle of a misguided military strategy, that of relying on colossal machines as a magic bullet. While Germany invested resources in this steel leviathan, the Allies produced thousands of versatile and efficient. The result was inevitable. The mouse didn't save the Reich. It didn't win a single battle. It didn't even fire a shot in combat. It was, quite simply, a symbol of Hitler's megalomania and the disconnect between his war dreams and reality. Yet its existence continues to fascinate historians, modelers, and military enthusiasts. Its mere conception raises troubling questions. What would have happened if the mouse had been mass-produced? Could it have changed the course of some battles? Or would it have only hastened the downfall of the Reich? Whatever the case, the mouse remains a tank-shaped warning. Bigger isn't always better, and in war, efficiency often trumps excess. The treasure of the SS Gairsoppa, silver in the depths. In the vast and treacherous North Atlantic, where waves can reach the height of buildings and the wind cuts skin like a razor, lies one of the most coveted and mysterious secrets of the Second World War. A secret that slept for more than 7 decades in the abysmal darkness of the ocean. The shipwreck of the SS Gairsoppa, a modest British merchant ship that unwittingly became an underwater legend. The SS Gairsoppa was built at the beginning of the 20th century. It was a sturdily built steamship, originally intended for trade routes between the British Empire and its colonies. For years, it carried routine cargo: metals, tea, cotton, machinery. But when war broke out in Europe and the oceans became battlefields, nothing remained routine. In 1940, the Gairsoppa was requisitioned by the British Ministry of Transport, like so many other civilian ships, and became part of the vast merchant fleet that kept Britain alive amid the Nazi blockade. It was in December of that year that the Gairsoppa embarked on its most fateful journey. It departed from Calcutta, India, loaded with a mix of goods crucial to the war effort: tea, iron ingots, and something else. Something that would change its history forever: more than 200 tons of silver, equivalent to millions of pounds sterling at the time. Its destination was the port of Galway, on the west coast of Ireland, where it was to deliver the cargo to fuel a British economy on the brink of collapse. But the voyage was anything but simple. The Atlantic was infested with German U-boats. The fearsome U-boats lurked like sharks in the fog, waiting for the convoys to disperse. And so it happened. In February 1941, battered by a storm, the Gairsoppa became separated from convoy SL-64. Almost out of fuel and alone, it became an easy target. It was then that the U-boat U-101, under the command of Captain Ernst Mengersen, located her. With deadly accuracy, he fired a single torpedo. The shell hit the side of the Gairsoppa, which immediately began to sink. There was no time for effective transmissions or distress signals. Only one crew member survived of the 85 on board, Officer Richard Ayres, who managed to cling to a life raft for 13 days at sea until he was rescued by a British corvette. For decades, the story of the Gairsoppa remained a half-forgotten tale in the naval archives. It was known that it was carrying silver, that it had been torpedoed, but its exact location remained a mystery. Some said it was near Ireland, others that it had foundered further south. Fact and legend mingled like ocean currents. Everything changed in 2011 when the American company Odyssey Marine Exploration, specializing in high-risk rescues, launched a state-of-the-art search. Using autonomous underwater vehicles and high-resolution sonar scanners, they achieved the unthinkable, finding the remains of the Gairsoppa at a depth of more than 4,700 meters. There, largely intact, lay the ship's hull, covered in silt, with its precious cargo still sealed in the holds. The salvage, carried out between 2012 and 2013, was a feat of engineering. More than 110 tons of silver, including ingots and coins, were recovered in what is considered the largest recovery of precious metals from a shipwreck. The treasure emerged from the abyss as if time had stood still, protected by the pressure and extreme cold of the ocean floor. But the find was much more than a financial success. It was also a symbolic recovery. Each ingot bore the hallmarks of the British government. Each box spoke of the desperate effort to sustain an empire at war. Each piece of silver bore testimony to the sacrifice of a forgotten crew. The coins, engraved with the date 1940, were time capsules connecting history with memory. Today, the SS Gairsoppa is considered a war grave, and its story is told in museums, documentaries, and books. It is honored not only as an epic shipwreck, but as a symbol of the logistical struggle behind war, the power of the sea, and the secrets that still lie in the depths. Because in war, not only battles are lost, fortunes are also lost, many of which, like the Gairsoppa, still wait beneath the waves to be rediscovered. 42 attacks, the man who cheated death. Adolf Hitler was, without exaggeration, one of the most closely watched, protected, and paranoid leaders in history. Yet during his reign, he faced at least 42 documented assassination attempts, ranging from simple improvised attacks to complex plots orchestrated by high-ranking military officials. This chapter not only addresses the staggering number of attempts, but also breaks down some of the most iconic, exploring how and why they failed. One of the earliest and most audacious attacks was the work of Georg Elser, a German carpenter. Convinced that Hitler must die to save Germany, he acted on his own initiative. For months, he infiltrated the Bürgerbräukeller beer hall in Munich, where Hitler gave his annual speech commemorating the failed 1923 putsch. Elser dug a compartment in the column behind the platform and placed a timed bomb. On November 8, 1939, the bomb exploded as planned. But Hitler had left 13 minutes earlier, cutting short his speech due to weather problems affecting its transport. The blast killed 8 people and injured dozens, but Hitler was unharmed. Elsa was captured and, after years of imprisonment, executed in 1945. His solitary, meticulous, and courageous act is remembered today as one of the most serious and technically impressive attempts. Probably the most well-known and elaborate attempt was Operation Valkyrie, led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, who, horrified by the regime's atrocities, led a network of army officers determined to kill Hitler and seize control of the government. On July 20, 1944, Stauffenberg attended a meeting at Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. He carried a hidden bomb in his briefcase. He left it under the table and excused himself while the device, activated by a chemical detonator, counted down the seconds. The explosion was devastating, killing 4 people and injuring many others. But Hitler, protected by the massive frame of the oak table, survived with minor injuries. The failed attempt triggered a wave of reprisals. Stauffenberg was executed that same night, and more than 7,000 people were arrested. Some 4,980 were convicted and many executed. It was the last serious attempt from within the army itself. Another curious attempt was that of the young Swiss theology student Maurice Bavaud, who decided to assassinate Hitler for ideological and moral reasons. He bought a pistol and traveled to Germany. In November 1938, he stood in the crowd during a parade in Munich, intending to shoot him. However, he couldn't get close enough. Hitler was surrounded by SS soldiers and officers, and the would-be shooter was deterred by the fear of missing and being caught. Bavaud was captured days later, executed in 1941, and claimed decades later as a martyr for opposing Nazism. General Henning von Tresckow, another important member of the German internal resistance, participated in multiple plots. In 1943, he prepared a bomb hidden in a crate of liquor and placed it on the plane transporting Hitler from Smolensk. The bomb, which used a British chemical detonator, was intended to detonate in mid-flight, but due to the extreme cold in the plane's hold, the detonator failed to work. Hitler arrived safely in Berlin, unaware of how close he had come to death. Tresckow continued plotting until his suicide in July 1944, following the failure of Operation Valkyrie. Allies such as the United Kingdom and the United States also considered eliminating Hitler. Operation Foxley, devised by the British SOE in 1944, involved assassinating him as he strolled around his Berghof retreat. A sniper would have fired from a high vantage point, but the operation was never carried out, partly because of concerns about the political implications. Killing Hitler, some argued, might prolong the war if his successor consolidated power more effectively. The United States, for its part, had bizarre proposals, such as feminizing Hitler with hormones to destabilize him, or distributing fake leaflets to sow suspicion within his inner circle. None of these plans were carried out. Why did all attempts fail? Hitler's survival has been the subject of debate and speculation. Some attribute it to chance. Others point to the dictator's extreme paranoia, which constantly changed his schedule, limited his contact with the public, and relied only on a small circle. His residences were protected by multiple security rings, meetings were unpredictable, attendees were thoroughly screened. Hitler did not use an open car or allow himself to be easily seen in public spaces. Furthermore, the culture of fear in Nazi Germany made plots difficult to organize. The Gestapo, informants, and the repressive apparatus stifled any attempt at dissent. Many attacks never made it past the planning stage. Although they all failed, the 42 attempts on Hitler's life were not in vain. They reveal that within Germany itself there was resistance, men and women who did not share his ideology, who were not complicit in the extermination, and who risked and lost their lives for a different future. Klaus von Stauffenberg, Georg Elser, Henning von Treschow. Today their names appear on squares, schools, and monuments throughout Germany. They also remind us of a harsh lesson. Sometimes evil survives thanks to indecision, fear, or luck. Hitler wasn't immortal. He was merely the beneficiary of a series of circumstances that kept him alive until he decided to take his own life. On April 30th, 1945, in the Berlin bunker, Hitler committed suicide alongside Eva Braun. He died without trial, without being shot, but his regime, his vision, and his empire of hatred collapsed soon after. Of the 42 times death knocked on his door, he only let it in once, and it was too late. But if these 42 failed attempts teach us anything, it's that even in the most brutal regimes, resistance always exists. Not everyone obeyed blindly. Not everyone remained silent. Not everyone was afraid. The story of the conspirators against Hitler is the parallel story of the Germany that was not Nazi, of those who did not chant Heil, of those who knew that the Reich did not bring greatness but devastation. Many of them were ordinary men, carpenters, theologians, low-ranking officers. Others, like von Stauffenberg or von Treschow, were career soldiers, trained to serve the state, but who chose morality over obedience. These men and women defied not only the dictator, but also a system that monitored every gesture, listened to every sigh, and punished every hesitation with exile, prison, or death. In many cases, they knew they wouldn't survive, and yet they tried. They didn't do it for personal glory. They did it out of conviction. In letters, diaries, and wills, they spoke of dignity, of redemption, of the hope that a different Germany would one day emerge from the rubble. And he did. Decades later, a reunited Germany doesn't hide these chapters. It honors them. In Berlin, a statue commemorates Elsa. In Stuttgart, a school is named after Stauffenberg. In Munich, bronze paving stones commemorate those who tried to stop the monster from within. Such symbolic acts are a reminder that memory cannot be buried, not even by fear. Paradoxically, the fact that Hitler died by his own hand without being eliminated by one of his enemies does not diminish the courage of those who attempted it. On the contrary, it elevates their legacy. Because they were not fighting for personal victory, but for a country that would once again face the world and say, "We too resist." Hitler fell when his empire collapsed from within, when cities were in ashes, the people were starving, and the war machine could no longer sustain itself. He wasn't killed by a bullet, but his end was just as devastating, isolated, betrayed, and cornered by the entire world, including his own people. Thus ends this chronicle, with 42 opportunities wasted by history but not by memory. Because in each of these attempts lies the possibility of a braver humanity, one that doesn't wait for evil to collapse on its own, but rises and confronts it, even knowing it may not survive the attempt. Today, those 42 times are not a symbol of failure. They are a symbol of resilience, and perhaps also a call that it is never too late to act, to speak out, to stop what must be stopped. The Ghost Army: Art, Deception, and Victory. In the lesser-known annals of World War II, there is a story that at first glance seems like something out of a fiction novel. It has no heroes with medals or battles with crossfire. Instead, it has paintbrushes, backdrops, pre-recorded sounds, and a troupe of artists, architects, and graphic designers who became soldiers of deception. This is the story of the Ghost Army, the US 23rd Special Troops Headquarters, a unit whose existence remained classified for more than 50 years and whose tactical impact was as subtle as it was decisive. As armored divisions advanced and front lines burned in Europe, this unusual group of approximately 1,100 men deployed across the continent carrying not rifles but tarps, loudspeakers, inflatable tanks and transmitters. Their mission was singular: to deceive the enemy. Their specialty, the art of illusion. The Ghost Army soldiers mounted entire diversionary operations. In a matter of hours, they could simulate the deployment of an entire military division. Barracks, vehicles, heavy weapons, even the bustle of troops. Their tanks were made of rubber, their airplanes of canvas. They set up these sets in strategic locations, diverting the enemy's attention from the real Allied movements. But they didn't stop there. Using powerful loudspeakers mounted on trucks, they reproduced the sounds of marching military columns, roaring engines, and loading weapons. The auditory deception perfectly complemented the visual illusion. And to reinforce the charade, a third component was added: radio deception. Expert operators transmitted fake messages, following the communication patterns of the real units, convincing the German interceptors that what they were hearing was authentic. In operations like Normandy, where surprise was vital, the Ghost Army helped confuse the German High Command about the actual landing location. Later, during the Battle of the Rhine, they simulated the crossing of entire divisions at a false point on the river, allowing real troops to do so unopposed on another sector. Each maneuver executed by this unit could mean hundreds, even thousands of lives saved. Despite their courage, their exploits remained unknown until decades later. The members of the 23rd Headquarters didn't carry weapons, but they risked their lives behind enemy lines. Their tool was creativity, their battlefield, perception.